right. AP Langers. So what I want to do now is we're going to talk about the actual essay for Emerson, Self-Reliance. Now, this is the one that I wrote, and I want you to know right up front, this is not perfect. I wrote it in a fairly short period of time, but it did take me longer than 45 minutes because I tried to make it so that the errors don't make it impossible for you to learn with. The ideas were fairly swift to come because the piece was pretty short, and I figured out what I wanted to do pretty much when I first read it. I've never written this essay before. This is the first time, so I want you to know that what you read is not going to be perfect, but it is going to be correct, and it would get I think it would get a high score if someone were to score it. So I'm fairly sure of that. So I want to go over it with you and talk about what I've done. First of all, I want to tell you that I made a mistake in the other video when I told you, I don't know what I was thinking, that in the rhetorical analysis that the introduction might be shorter. That's not what that's not true. The conclusion is what will be shorter. The actual introduction is going to have quite a bit of information in it, just depending on how you organize it. Some people put a little summary in between the analysis. They'll put the intro and then they'll put a little summary of what the actual essay that you're responding to is about. Just a little summary, and then they'll go on into their analysis. But in this case, I just really didn't have time to do that. Didn't feel like I had time to do that. I wanted to think of it as if this were a timed essay for me and for you. So I just went ahead and put all the information that we talked about that's in SoapCat, that's in SpaceCat, that's good, SoapCat, in SpaceCat, that is in the introduction. So I want to show you what I did. I highlighted some of the words, but first I had to give a little background information. So you hope that they will give you some background information when you read whatever essay they give you, because then you can put in some exigence, you can put in that context. If they don't give you any context, then you hope that you know something in your head. There's your metacognitive skill coming through. So here I said I knew a little bit about transcendentalism. I don't know a whole lot because I teach AP Lang and I teach some American Lit alongside of that, have in the past, but not a lot of detail. So this is kind of what I know that's in my head, and that is that Ralph Waldo Emerson was a transcendentalist of the early 1800s, and he responds to the idea that institutions and intellectuals corrupt independent thinking. So this is what he says in his essay. He mentions the institutions and the intellectuals, I think, in the third paragraph. And I use the word corrupt, a really strong verb. Respond is a strong verb. Independent thinking, which prompting him, which is another verb, nice verb, to write his famous essay, Self-Reliance. So I'm introducing what we're going to talk about. And then I just jump on in there, and I'm going to try to get all that SpaceCat stuff in there. In it, he claims that minds grow, and that's a strong verb here, action verb, when given the opportunity to work hard, and that people should trust themselves, another strong verb, as creative individuals. Now notice that I put an adjective before individuals, that I'm using strong nouns here, strong adjectives, because you need to know who we're talking about. We're talking not just individuals, but we need to trust people that they are creative individual. And that's a very important word. So adjectives are your friend, not basic adjectives, but the ones that are precise. And so here in the next sentence, I'm going to write my entire thesis statement. It is possible that your thesis statement could be in 2 sentences, but you really want to go for the one, because when you go for the one, if you work with it just a little bit, you can put it in a way that it just really flows, it's parallel, it makes sense, and it doesn't waste any time getting to the point. And then the reader knows exactly what to expect. So I addressed the tone in the very beginning. I said, in this didactic essay, that's tone, Emerson emphasizes, and there's your action verb, his definition of self-reliance by juxtaposing ideas with varied punctuation. But I don't leave it at varied punctuation. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what it is I'm going to talk about. We're going to introduce and talk about the semicolon, the colon, and the dash in order to define and inspire independent thinking and encourage hard work. ultimately moving attentive readers to self-examine their own motivation and abilities. Now, I want you to notice that this thesis statement is not the same thesis statement that was on the previous video. It's similar, but it is not the same. That is because as I worked through it, as I began to type it, you can think of that other slide maybe as my rough draft, perhaps, because anytime you write a thesis statement, it is almost certainly going to change. And so as I wrote this essay, I realized that my thesis statement is not exactly what I wanted it to say. So I went back. I didn't even write the whole essay before I went back and changed it because I knew where I wanted to go. And that's just part of the process. Remember, your thesis statement is like silly putty. It's going to change. It's going to morph into something different. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you want to do is make sure that you follow your line of reasoning. So I am following the line of reasoning here, and I'm going on into the first paragraph. Now, this is my first body paragraph, and I want you to see the blue. The blue, that's my subthesis. The excerpt from Emerson's essay begins with an immediate juxtaposition of unique definitions and analogies emphasized through the use of semicolons. Now, my thinking right now is that I need to take the word and analogies out because I didn't have time to put that in there. And I'm seeing it here, and I realized I had not done that. So I would probably just scratch that out when I, at the end of the time, I would probably just erase that part because I really didn't talk about analogies. But it's there, and they're a really important part of the paper. So I said here that I'm talking about the juxtaposition and the emphasis and the unique definitions emphasized through this use. Now, notice the subthesis at the end. Separating each notion with a semicolon emphasizes and advances the result of what happens when people are not self-reliant. So you can see those two sentences, they're not the same sentence, and they don't really say the same thing, but they have a connection. And that's what we're talking about when we say make a sandwich. So if you'll note, these two pieces, if you were going to do a dot to dot, you could put a dot right here in the thesis statement, another dot here, and then with the evidence, dot, dot, and then dot here. So it's a dot to dot, and you can draw lines in between them because they're all related. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a line of reasoning. So if you all of a sudden start talking about something that has nothing to do with unique definitions and analogies through the use of semicolons, then what you've done is you've broken your line of reasoning, and that's what they're looking for. I mean, what they don't want you to do that. They're going to look for that line of reasoning that is actually there, and so that the reader can follow through and know what it is you're saying, and it makes sense, logical sense to them. I think I used some fairly strong verbs here and nouns. The semicolon between his points emphasize individual thinking, the whole point of the essay. Now, you know when I thought of that? When I was writing it. I knew that he joined these important ideas with a semicolon, but I didn't think about how those points emphasize individualistic thinking. I didn't think about making that comparison until I was actually writing the essay. So I did that. And then I need to use text, but not a lot of text. So I said, if envy is ignorance and imitation is suicide and hard work is essential to well-being, then there is no shame in being oneself. His logical progression of ideas are short and to the point, building as the paragraph lengthens. So look what I'm doing here. I'm not only telling you what the paragraph says, but I'm telling you what it does. Remember, says and does. It's very important that we tell what the paragraph does. And at the end of the paragraph, the semicolon is used between other logical progressions of thought. The most important one, that without individual thinking, genius deserts him. No muse, no invention, no hope. And then I explain that. I analyze that. And I say separating each notion with a semicolon emphasizes and advances the result of what happens when people are not self-reliant. So you see, I'm explaining what the author is doing and how he is doing it. I'm not telling you my opinion about what he says, because my opinion is not welcome here. It is not welcome. All right, now I'm going to go into the next paragraph. This one is really short, and I've written you a little note at the end. And it says this, in the second, by the way, I'm taking this by chunks. I'm not going to say, oh, this is how he used semicolons. Oh, this is how he used colon. I'm not doing that. I'm saying at the beginning of the paper, he does this. In the middle of the paper, he does that. So right here, I'm kind of in the middle of the paper. In the second paragraph, where I could say in the middle, Emerson's use of the colon separates the main idea that Emerson presents. And then I tell you what it is: trust thyself. And then I tell why this colon is important. The colon is critical to the entire paragraph as it emphasizes the crux of his essay. I didn't think of this until I was writing it last night. The colon thus sets up Emerson to defend his claim that God has provided ability to each heart, and it should predominate in all of us. Self-trust is essential. And so if you'll look, I tried to make a little connection there at the end. There's not a lot of information here. I felt like I was going to run out of time had I been really looking at the clock. And so I stopped, but I do want you to know that had I had time, that I would have discussed the use of a semicolon in this chunk as well. Because see, you don't have to divide it into the three. In fact, you shouldn't divide it into those three things, so semicolon, colon, dash. You shouldn't divide it that way. You divide it chronologically. So in the middle, there's a colon, and it's really important. There's also, though, a semicolon use, which is also important, but I really didn't have time to go there, so I didn't. And now I'm going to go to the last paragraph. The last paragraph provided in the excerpt, so I'm taking it in chunks. This is the last one, is yet another example of how Emerson uses punctuation to emphasize, in this case, the notion that self-reliant minds will consistently change and contradict. Now, I want you to notice I used dashes here, and I did it for a reason. He used the dash. I'm talking about the dash, so I used the dash. Here he uses the dash to separate the thoughts that he projects a response to the contradiction might look like. Maybe that doesn't make sense, so maybe I should reword that, but I wouldn't have time. But I think if I looked at it a couple times, if I were reading your paper, I think I would get that. So he's identifying what other people are going to think, and he's going to respond, oh, so you shall be misunderstood. Then is that so bad? So I'm telling you, I'm showing you how the dashes were used. And then I say, after listing other great minds who have also been misjudged, the conclusion is easy. To be great is to be misunderstood. So understand here, again, this essay is about Emerson's essay. It's not about necessarily punctuation. So I'm ending it up with what Emerson is trying to say. Now, let's just say I'm running out of time. What I could do, I have this last sentence. If Emerson is correct, who would want anything but to be misunderstood? In other words, you know, if to be creative and to think and to feel good about ourselves and to work hard, if that means to be misunderstood, then we want to be like Emerson says. So what you could do is leave it the way it is and have a last one sentence in your intro. Or if you wanted, you could then do it like that. Well, I'm having trouble getting it there. And just kind of end it right there. I particularly like doing it this way so that it does look like I thought about the conclusion. And, you know, maybe I ran out of time, so here it is. So that is how you organize a rhetorical analysis. Thanks, guys.